Hey everyone, I'm Walt, one of the Highrock pastors, and today we're jumping into a topic that applies to literally everyone: singleness and marriage. A few weeks ago, this picture popped up on my phone's photo roll. It's one of me and Jen at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York a number of years back. And it looks like a very typical nice selfie of a nice day, and when I saw it on my photo roll, it made me pause. I wasn't remembering the art we looked at or the conversation over lunch. I was remembering that I didn't want to be there with Jen at all. In fact, I wasn't even supposed to be there. We were going through a rough patch, probably the worst in about a decade of marriage. It was one of those seasons where we had nothing nice to say to one another. Every small comment seemed to spark a big outrage, and we were constantly under each other's skin. We were heading down to New York to hang out with Jen's brother and his wife, and the plan was that Jen and her brother were going to go to the Met. And I was going to hang back with our daughter, and while she napped, I was going to get 2 hours of time to myself. And I couldn't wait. But when we got to the city, my family member surprised us. They were going to watch Ryan that afternoon, so Jen and I could get some time to ourselves. Wow, thanks. So kind of you. And I remember Ubering over to the museum, staring out the window, and just feeling deflated. Marriage was supposed to be this great, joy-filled, lifelong thing. But at that moment, I just wanted out. Ironically, moments like the museum date were what I daydreamed of when I was single. But in the Uber that day, my thoughts turned towards the single life. Now, that sounded pretty nice right then. But as many of us can attest to, there can also be a lot of pain in the single life. In our culture, there's pretty much one reason that people get married, and that's because they want to. There's not a lot of arranged marriages happening around here. We don't marry for household alliances. When Disney merged with Marvel, no one from the Mickey Mouse family had to marry an Avenger. But what about singleness? Why would anybody want to be single? For some single people, it's for the same reason that people choose to be married. They want to. This is the life that they desire for themselves, and many feel God has called them to. But choosing singleness? That's just a little weird, isn't it? Well, a few years ago, I was speaking with a Highrocker who felt called to a single life. Yes, he saw the appeal of marriage and constant companionship, but he wanted to pursue relational depth through friendship, not a spouse. Yet when he shared this with others, he got immediate pushback. That was a ridiculous idea. Of course he should pursue marriage. So instead of feeling supported, he felt shamed and more alone than ever. Or perhaps someone was once married but now finds themselves single due to divorce or death. I have a friend from college whose wife left him even though he really wanted to keep working on things. He thought he would be married for the rest of his life. But that's no longer the case for him. And finally, many people desire to be married, but that just has not been an option for them. They desire the physical and emotional intimacy of marriage and grieve its unavailability. With that unmet desire can come a number of questions and concerns, such as, am I lovable? Will I spend my life alone? Will I ever have children? Will my parents and friends ever stop reminding me? Will I be a burden on society when I get older or in times of need? The wrestling is real. The fear is real. And there aren't easy answers to these hard questions. Whether you are married or single, I'm willing to bet that you can point to a place of pain in that aspect of your life. Perhaps it's an unmet desire, feeling alone, feeling stuck, or feeling defeated after numerous efforts to change things for the better have failed. Over the past month and a half, we've been exploring the depths of our emotional lives because we believe our emotional health and our spiritual health are inextricably tied together. And when we try to separate the two, we run into problems. There are all kinds of issues when we ignore our feelings, dismiss our grief, live beyond our limits, and fail to consider the impact of our family of origin. And this is all the more true when we fail to prioritize spiritual health as either single or married people. God has placed calls on our lives. Our first capital C call is our call into a loving relationship with Jesus. As Pastor Dave reminded us on Easter, we are caught up in a love story. God's relentless pursuit to free us from sin, shame, and death and restore our relationship with Him and others. Our first call for all of us, single or married, is to live into a loving union with Jesus. And I have so appreciated how every sermon in this series had led us deeper in that call, in that relationship, beyond the shallow spirituality that we often settle for. That first call is paramount. All of our other lowercase c calls flow out of this call, and this includes both singleness and marriage. Singleness is one framework in which this call is played out, and marriage is another. And at different times in our lives, we may move from one call into the other. In God's vision of singleness and marriage, each status comes with opportunities to know Jesus deeply and bear witness powerfully to others. God's vision of singleness and marriage also come with God-given limits that we should follow in order to live a healthy life. Single or married, there are opportunities and limits that God is calling us to. Instead of seeing singleness or marriage as something to resist, ignore, or minimize, each call provides an invitation to an experience of full, healthy life. And this life can be a blessing to everyone. But all too often, spiritual communities have pitted these two calls against one another. The pendulum has swung back and forth between the two. For much of the first 1,500 years of the church, singleness and celibacy were prized. Singles sat up front in the church because their singleness was esteemed, not just because they were trying to meet other singles. But then, after the Reformation about 500 years ago, that flipped, and the married came to the front of the church, and singles were kicked to the back. Obviously, there was more at stake than just seating here. In many Protestant evangelical communities, marriage and family have become the ideal, the aspiration, even a litmus test by which faithfulness and giftedness is measured against. I've spoken to a number of singles who feel like black sheep, second-class citizens. And the evangelical community has certainly dumped way more resources into getting people out of singleness than helping them thrive in it. And we aren't the only church that have wrestled with this. In fact, it was a hot topic in the Corinthian church 2,000 years ago. Different views on celibacy existed in the ancient world. Most ancient writers condemned it, and many Jewish teachers even considered it sinful. If you were physically capable of producing children, you had a moral obligation to do so. However, a number of philosophers and minor religious sects, including some Jewish groups, advocated for celibacy over marriage. They felt that marriage was a distraction from the pursuit of wisdom and righteousness. So there were cultural forces debating the merits of singleness and marriage and which was the more virtuous call. Added to this mix was the Christian sexual ethic, a call to a self-giving sexual relationship with your spouse, but self-control outside of marriage. For many non-Jewish converts to the Christian faith, this was an incredibly new and revolutionary teaching. So with all of these different narratives flying about, it was inevitable that some confusion crept in. And we see that bubble up in Paul's correspondence with the Corinthians. Paul's first and second letters to the Corinthians are half of a back and forth conversation between Paul and that church. In 1 Corinthians 7, Paul refers back to a letter from them. Now, for the matters that you wrote about, it is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman. A better way of translating this might be, it is good for a man not to touch or not to arouse the affections of a woman. Basically, don't be out there putting a vibe out, hoping to hook up with someone and use them for your own pleasure. Sex is a way to serve your spouse. But some in the early church were clearly confused. Does this teaching include my spouse? Is that what faithfulness looks like? And Paul pushes back on this. People, it's too late for that. You've made your choice. Paul clearly, firmly states the husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and likewise the wife to her husband. Literally, you have made your bed, now sleep in it with your spouse. And Paul takes his vision for marriage a step further than simply performing marital duties. He goes on to say the wife does not have authority over her own body, but yields it to her husband. That was consistent with the male-dominant culture of that time. But then Paul throws down this revolutionary, scandalous, countercultural corollary. In the same way, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but yields it to his wife. Paul holds out a vision for marriage that is far deeper than the cultural norm then, as well as the cultural norm now. When you become married, you are no longer your own. Your life is now bound up with your spouse. And that union isn't just a functional one, but one of intimate partnership. Both of you now have a call to live out your life with Christ as married people. Paul even goes so far as to say, do not deprive each other except perhaps by mutual consent and for a time, that you may devote yourselves to prayer. I don't know about the other married couples out there, but I wouldn't say this is common practice in the Quick household. If Jen and I have been apart for a while, it's not because we've been praying. It's because we're busy, distracted, tired, feeling frustrated with one another. But Paul essentially says, we can't act like we are single anymore. We now have a call to our spouse. With that reflection now behind him, Paul shares his personal preference. I wish that all of you were as I am, which is to say, single. Paul is all about that single life. He makes an important qualification. Each of you has your own gift from God. One has this gift, another has that. Both marriage and singleness are a gift, each with their unique opportunities. Paul's not trying to reinforce cultural divisions, but at the same time, he really likes his own gift. Paul embraces his call as a single man. He writes, to the unmarried and to the widows, I say, it is good to stay unmarried, as I do. Paul loves the freedom of singleness so much that he unashamedly encourages those who are single to stay single. And to be clear, what gets Paul excited isn't just the freedom to do whatever he wants and look out for his own interests, but rather the freedom to pursue God's purposes in the world. The freedom to love and bless others in dynamic, creative, unexpected, and far-reaching ways. It's a freedom to commit to causes or communities that are bigger than one person or family. Paul says, I would like you to be free from concern. Now, I'm saying this for your own good, not to restrict you, but that you may live in a right way in undivided devotion to the Lord. Rather than being concerned with the needs of a spouse or caught up in the needs of himself, Paul finds joy in serving God freely. And he wants others to experience that same joy. He says to the singles, but those who marry will face many troubles in this life. And I want to spare you of this. Many of us are aware of the pain in being single, but Paul lights here the pain of marriage, the hardship of marital strain, the ugliness of divorce, the messiness of generational sin, like Pastor John spoke about a few weeks ago. For Paul, the call to marriage shouldn't just be wandered into haphazardly. He points out significant upsides to singleness. But at the end of the day, these lessons on marriage and singleness are for all of us to value and affirm and uphold. Part of this is out of an honest acknowledgement that we don't know what the future holds. The death of a spouse or unexpectedly finding someone new later in life are just a few examples of these little C calls changing. But we also believe that we are creating a community of Christians who love and serve one another across all kinds of differences, including singleness and marriage. As a kid, I would occasionally go to a movie theater that was showing a movie in 3D. And this was pre-Avatar 3D, so let's be honest, it was not great. But we would wear glasses with a red lens and a blue lens that would cause the image to pop out of the screen. You needed both color filters in order to experience the magic. In the same way, both marriage and singleness offer us a window into God's character and life in God's kingdom. Both have powerful things to teach us about the breadth and depth of God's love, the power of commitment and self-control, and the ways that God shows up for his people. If we are just focusing on one, we miss out on the beauty and benefits of the other. I love how Paul sums this up in verse 17. Nevertheless, each person should live as a believer in whatever situation the Lord has assigned to them, just as God has called them. Whatever situation you are in today, whether you are married or single, live as God has called you. Be intentional about your singleness or your marriage. Make it your ambition to have a healthy single life or a healthy married life that flows out of your union with Jesus and empowers you to bless others. Even if the situation you are in today is not the one you want to be in, you're in a crisis with your spouse or you're overwhelmed by loneliness, whatever the case may be, I encourage all of us to ask ourselves what steps we need to take in order to have a healthy single or married life. For those of us who are married, your call to your spouse and your kids if you have them is now the primary way that you follow Jesus. I say that especially because some of us who grew up in the church have seen pastors or leaders basically act like their ministry or their church is their primary call, and who regularly abandoned their families or just gave them the leftovers. I know Highrockers who have borne the brunt of that in incredibly painful ways. Similarly, plenty of others have checked off the box of marriage and family only to then prioritize their careers or other pursuits. And these could even be good, noble things. But as Paul told us, we don't belong to ourselves anymore. We belong to our spouse. Marriage isn't something that helps us with our call. It is our call. We get to say yes to the opportunities of marriage, but we absolutely must accept the limits of it as well. One of the biggest pitfalls in marriage is when couples assume that passion will come naturally. And then, when that passion fades, they assume something is wrong, or this is a sign that they shouldn't be married after all. Just the other day, I saw an anonymous post on a neighborhood Facebook group of a woman sharing that all she and her husband ever talk about is their kids. They take their kids everywhere, and they have no real relationship apart from child raising. She lamented, "I have a great partner in parenting, but I don't feel like I have a husband." Now, this might be strange to hear, but your relationship with your spouse is meant to be more than just a partnership in parenting. It is meant to be a passionate union. All married couples should make passion a spiritual practice. Paul spoke to the need for regular rhythms of physical intimacy, and the importance of this can't be underestimated. Drifting apart physically will lead to temptation. Not just sexual, though that is real, but also temptations towards bitterness and contempt and even simple unawareness. Unawareness of your spouse, unawareness of their needs. In marriage, we are called to prioritize sexual, emotional, and relational intimacy with our spouse. So schedule date nights. Be quick to encourage and praise one another. Laugh together. Consider how you can make life easier for your spouse and act on it. We are not on our own anymore. We belong to someone else. And something that will help with this is praying for passion. Last summer, we preached a whole series on prayer. And one of the main takeaways was that we don't just pray to change things around us, but we pray so that our hearts would be changed. When we develop a practice of praying for our spouse, we can't help but become more mindful of them, of their needs, of how we might support them. We get to love them like Christ loves the church, passionately and sacrificially. Now, this investment of passion isn't simply for you to enjoy, but so that the love that grows within you will overflow to those around you. Out of this union, you can determine how you will serve together. For those of you with children, increased passion will help you move beyond just practical co-parenting to raising your kids as an expression of mutual mission. And it doesn't stop there. Just as the church serves families, families need to serve the church. Because the church is a community where we all serve one another, married and single alike. But now, you get to discern how to serve from a place of mutuality, same-pagedness, and emotional abundance. At the beginning of the sermon, I shared how Jen and I were in a rough place a few years back. I wish I could say that our day at the Met was where things really turned around, but it wasn't. Things even got worse. And I wasn't sure what our future was going to look like. Do we even have a future? But over time, things began to change. It was not this big, dramatic lightning bolt moment. We went down into that pit by taking many small steps down, and we climbed out by taking many small steps back up. We began to affirm and encourage one another more. We prayed for one another. We began prioritizing each other and making decisions based on what was good for our marriage, not just what was practical or convenient or functional for parenting or working. Our marriage became our call, our vocation, not just what we filled in under relationship status. One day, a friend of ours at our gym pulled me aside and said, "Hey, I just want you to know that people around here watch how you and Jen relate to one another. And looking at you two has given us a really compelling picture of what marriage can be like." I was totally floored. And I share that now, not to say like, "Hey, be like us," but to offer encouragement that if you feel like your marriage is in the dumpster, there is hope. God can do amazing things far beyond what we can imagine. Our marriages can be our loudest message to the world about God's goodness and grace. And for single people, your singleness can be that message as well. For those of us who are single, pursuing a healthy single life needs to be our ambition, in which we acknowledge both the limits and the opportunities of singleness. There can be this assumption that cultivating a healthy marriage is harder than cultivating a healthy single life. And so there are a million resources to invest in marriages. I'm not saying those aren't needed or helpful, they are. But while marriages have many support structures to help couples grow, it requires just as much effort and intentionality to invest in one's health as a single person. Singles aren't necessarily coming home to meaningful, life-giving relationships. If you're single, maybe you live with others who encourage and support you, but maybe you live alone or maybe with roomies that are fine but not your go-tos. So again, every single person needs to ask, what do I need to do to live out of a healthy singleness for Christ? And here are a few practices you can put into place. First, to practice true companionship. Everyone needs friends, but it's worth emphasizing that single people need intimate relationships too. And while these lack the sexual component of a marriage, friendships can be cultivated that are profoundly deep, nurturing, and self-giving. And single people should be encouraged to pursue these types of relationships and communities. Some single high rockers are doing this in really compelling and beautiful ways. And for others, it may require effort to go beyond disposable friendships or just finding people to have a good time with. Full life with Jesus and with others requires paying a cost. And I want to acknowledge that the cost to committed, sacrificial, self-giving relationships is high. But as with everything in following Jesus, it is worth it. So who are the partners that you can journey with, perhaps through a season or perhaps through life? Who are the people who make you feel seen and known? Who are the people that you see and know and serve? Once you've determined who these people are, prioritize time with them and make sure that you get it. Second, how do you practice hospitality and service? How has God wired you to serve? What are the ways that you love to bless and welcome others? How can you offer encouragement and care and support to those around you? Does your life allow you the freedom to think in big ways and take big risks for causes that you are passionate about? What are the opportunities that you are able to say yes to and that you are able to follow Jesus into? I know many of you who are single do serve in radical and sacrificial ways. You do some of the grunt work around the church, you host small groups, you give your Sunday mornings to Kids Rock, and you advance God's kingdom in truly amazing and compelling ways. And to you, I encourage you to practice radical self-care. Because you don't have a spouse who will tell you you're doing too much. Know that you have the freedom to say no, and sometimes even the duty to say no when people ask for your time. Because there are opportunities and limits to your singleness. So I want to reaffirm what Pastor Dave said last week regarding the essential importance of the Sabbath, rest and delight. What restores your soul? Is it camping or cooking or going on Pokemon Go raids? Whatever makes your happy place, ensure that you're able to go there as often as you need so you too can experience God's goodness and be filled up before you are poured out for others. I believe that Highrock can be a place where both single people and married people can thrive, not just in their own silos, but together. Because when we are pursuing true spiritual health and true sacrifice for others, it doesn't just stay within us. It flows out to bless those around us. I love seeing a Highrock couple befriend a grad student, and when they realized she was burning out, they sent her to the Caribbean for a week so she could get some much-needed replenishment on the beach. I love and deeply appreciate how my single Highrock friends will often randomly reach out to me and say they're praying for me, or ask how I'm doing, or how they truly invest in the next generation of kids in our church by essentially becoming their heroes and modeling a profound love for Jesus. Now, I could go on and on, but I really got to wrap this up. So, church, if you are married or single, remember that your first and foremost, capital C call is to loving Jesus. The one who pursued you and laid down his life for you so that you would never feel unloved or alone again. And Christ will sustain you and build you up in your second call, whether it is in singleness or marriage, so that you, the church, and the whole world will experience God's full life together. Thanks be to God.